As an agenda goes for today's meeting, this webinar is for those that have a small footprint in AWS but are interested in becoming more strategic about how to leverage public cloud to improve key business drivers in 2016. 3 key business drivers that will be addressed are time to market, cost efficiency, and quality of product. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce Senior Cloud Architect Kevin Davis. Kevin has experience as an AWS customer at Scripps Networks, which is a large media company based in Knoxville, Tennessee. Major brands that Scripps Networks hosts are HGTV, Food Network, Do-It-Yourself Channel. At Scripps, Kevin was responsible for vision roadmap and the delivery of software build and the infrastructure automation platform that supports the software development lifecycle used by multiple products across multiple functions of the organization. Kevin has led a DevOps team of systems and software engineers and has 5 years of experience on AWS and 15 plus years of experience in the industry. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you for the opportunity to present some of my experience with AWS and how it relates to building business and empowering business and business transformation. So to start with, I'd like to take you back 5 years ago. The digital business unit at Scripps came to my team with a problem, a particular business problem, and there was a lot of pressure to kind of get it right. But it's not every day that a business unit actually brings a business problem to a core technology group. Usually, they come with solutions and then want the technology groups to kind of produce and come up with solutions around those things that they've already solved. So the digital business unit at Scripps was having a problem in that the market was changing. It was no longer acceptable for the sites to just be a static site that produced content to the end user. The result of that is a changing market that had some particular technology requirements involved that made it somewhat difficult to deliver with the standard IT processes and technologies that had existed up to that point. So in this slide, you'll see some of the specifics of the new requirements that were coming in to this business unit. One, they had to make things more interactive with the user. They needed to track the user more closely. They needed to kind of customize the site and the way the site viewed based on geographical regions or user types or the user information that they had. So there was a lot more dynamic aspect to what they were trying to do to entice the user. Another big point for them was data for decision making, and this one was huge, a huge factor in new technologies that were becoming available at the time. The reality for them was that they needed to focus on functionality and really the ad scenarios that work best for that business going forward. But in order to do that, they had to get closer to the user. In order to do that, they needed more analytics. In order to do that additional analytics, they really needed to be able to collect that data and get it into an engine for doing that analytics. So this was a big new change for them that would normally require a large undertaking. If you think about what data warehousing has cost over the years, it's a significant investment, and it's one, frankly, for cost reasons, this particular business unit had not really afforded themselves in the past. The next thing was just the dynamic aspect of the technology. It was changing a lot and changing very rapidly. And I think that's still the case for all of the digital space, and frankly for other verticals as well. For those who are in some of the data spaces, you know that the tools and things around analytics of data are changing, it seems like, on a weekly basis. As soon as you make one change, you've got another tool that may do it faster that's emerging very quickly. So they needed to figure out a way to handle those types of dynamic changes over time. The next aspect, really, really close to the business aspect that they were introducing, was that everything that they had done before had been B2C. Everything was based on ads, based on going directly to the user coming to the sites. And going forward in the future, they had a new problem set to solve for. They wanted to do more B2B characteristics to some of the business that they were trying to generate. And they were looking for ways that these business problems could be solved. And they understood very well that the business change would take more than just applying some technologies. There was really a change in core in how we did IT and how we interact with these business units that must change in order to achieve the goals that were applied here. So more technically, the challenge was seen in these ways. Scale was certainly something that we had to address. In order to be more dynamic, we recognized that we would have to be able to scale. Scale for the application, scale for meeting the need of particular portions of the organization, for people and processes. So we had to have a dynamic scale in virtually every form, and be able to respond and be agile in that sense, in order to meet the need of that business unit. At a technical level, the scale factor is something that Amazon is really good at, because we hear a lot about the horizontal scale scenarios that Amazon introduces, but one thing to not leave out of there is that there's certainly a vertical scale scenario that they introduce as well. Not only that, but using the platform, you're able to get into scenarios where you can actually do vertical scale without downtime, which for those who have been around IT for a long time is just something that has historically been a real challenge. The next factor was cost. So we had to do all this stuff, but we had to do it at a lower cost. This business unit had been running at basically a net loss for a long time, for a number of years, and they were there, and they still are. But at the time, that there was a real push for, hey, let's get in the green, or get into the black, and become a profitable business unit again. So the fact that you're bringing in upwards of $200 million a year doesn't matter if you're spending 230 trying to make the stuff happen. So cost as we made these changes was certainly a factor. So we wanted a lean and mean organization that could actually deliver to the new business requirements. We wanted to be transparent with those costs, both organizational costs and in a new way, the technology costs, which is something that I think really the cloud platforms provide an opportunity for, because you're really only paying for what you use, And because you get a bill every day and you can break that out, you can really see where that cost is being spent. You don't really have a, one of the popular things that IT organizations have done historically around cost is to provide a blended rate. There's no blended rate here. You can see real cost in real time. The next thing was to move to an OpEx model, which speaks to only using what you're only paying for what you use, getting out of that capital expenditure for upfront costs. Next is around reliability. And these are big time. These are kind of some big factors for this business unit. There were some problems on-prem, so they were looking for things like a lower time to recovery. So when something does happen, we can recover more quickly, and a higher uptime. So if we can raise the uptime and lower that TTR, it's a good proposition every time. And I think the AWS platform really provided a way for us to achieve that, and put that business unit in a scenario with new scenarios that they've never had the opportunity before. Quality is another scenario. This isn't just technology quality, but also in the process. So having opportunities to look at the overall process of how IT is delivered or how these products are delivered, and building quality into those processes and delivery functions was a big core of what the business was looking to achieve. And the last thing really was everybody wanted to focus on the core of the business and realizing that, hey, infrastructure and the technologies that drive all of those factors really are not core to serving media. So there was a real focus on, let's focus on our core business and allow everyone in the team, for every developer, every operations individual, all the way through the product life cycle, to focus on what brings value to the core business and potentially generates revenue. So now the change. So once we established what the challenge was, there was time for change. And I like to use this butterfly analogy because it really focuses the way we achieve change going forward in organizations. The key point here is that in order for a butterfly to go from that caterpillar stage to that butterfly stage, he has to get out on the limb. You don't see cocoons and all that stuff on the ground or on the tree trunk. They actually crawl out onto the limb and get out all the way out on the limb in order to start that phase. So really, where we see the most success is we work with organizations to deliver these changes, and it was very true with the script scenario. We had to kind of fail fast and take some chances, understood risk. It's not just blind risk, but understood risk to have early success and give ourselves an opportunity to grow and create change. So this change, really, the way I like to model this out is to describe the two different business models of how IT is consumed. Previously, when even with virtualization, we still continued with a build business model when it came to getting to IT assets. So every time someone had an idea or a new product was launched, or in a lot of cases, even when new functionality was launched, there's always a build that must occur as a result. And those are time-laden, they're management-laden. You end up with scenarios where you have to go from through multiple lines of project management to get to the real goal of what you're trying to get to. In order to get the build to occur, you get on multiple backlogs in order to, and then you have to work through those backlogs and get your stuff prioritized. It becomes a very laden process to get it done. Then we governed everything, right? So because we were siloed and between operations and then things that are more product related that are actually delivering those products, there's always this level of governance that went into everything that occurred. So this, again, is another one of those bottlenecks, right? You're generating some value in risk mitigation, but at the same time, you're bottlenecking the process of revenue generation. And then the last thing we had to do was manage over time. These things, we owned everything in the stack. All the technologies that were involved, we owned. Things that brought no value whatsoever, we had to own. So we had to manage all of that, and that takes people and it takes time, and a lot of process around it. So managing, and again, the whole process there is very management laden throughout and time consuming. So the goal was, and the achievement was, to move and change from that model, that build business model, to a consumerism business model, a consumer business model, where the business can directly consume IT as it needs to. You see this a lot just in the core of the infrastructure as a service or any of the other platform services that AWS offers, is that the intention is that you can now be a consumer of IT rather than a builder of IT. But then there's a whole other level that we achieved on top of that in order to actually deliver IT as a whole, as a service, just at a consumer basis for the business. And we did that through aligning directly to product owners. There's a level of alignment there so that you're generating the same goals, the same focuses. So again, what that's doing is removing that layer of management that's controlling workloads from between the product that's trying to generate revenue and the people that are needed and the technologies that are needed to actually deliver those things. The next thing we did was move quickly, right? This is a big part of getting to that consumer business model, is moving quickly, like I talked about with the butterfly. Get out on the limb, understand the risks, where we're taking them, and get some quick wins. Those generate learnings, and then the build up and the wave continues as you move forward to as everything just matures within the organization and how everyone in the organization is interfacing with each other. The next portion is self-management. So, once we've had some wins and people are starting to understand how to use these things, then the product, at a product level, people are able to really self-manage their own environments, self-manage their use of those environments. And then we move IT into a new realm of value proposition. And then finally, we iterate and mature. So even when we've got everything, we think we've got things automated and everything's great, there's still the need to iterate and mature. Many groups that undertake this look to try to automate themselves out of a job, and I still haven't met anyone who truly did that. It seems that there's always the next thing, the next iteration, the next maturity point where you can get better. It's continuous improvement. So a quick note about the quick wins and how AWS specifically, some of these services helped us get some quick wins. And we see this over and over again in other customers as well, where you've got to recognize that it takes time to become proficient at the platform. Any platform is true of any replatforming. So these services, and I'll point out Elastic Beanstalk in particular, were leveraged and are leveraged to shorten that cycle, to get a quick win. We used Elastic Beanstalk. It gives us it provides us some capabilities we wouldn't otherwise have, and we were able to drive solutions that way and get portions of the business unit up and going in AWS very quickly. I've got stories where a portion of the business unit came to us with a new idea that they needed to crank out pretty quickly. And in a 1-hour meeting of them describing what it is they're trying to achieve, they actually walked away from that 1-hour meeting with their dev environment in hand, ready to deploy to through an Elastic Beanstalk. And then the following day, we were able to provide them their production Beanstalk, and they were up and running in a week with a new idea. Those types of stories, when those things happen, those are the things that drive and build a bigger wave that kind of pushes on the shore, if you will, and people in the business start to take notice of those types of quick turnaround wins. So that's how we started, and then eventually, after we had matured a great deal for about 1.5 years, we then started a new end-to-end automation scenario to completely consumerize the proposition for our business unit. So today, every one of those business unit, every team within that business unit uses this framework to deploy from end to end, from the point that they have a new concept, within 20 minutes they can have not just their development environment and a place to deploy their code, but they can have all of their environments and all of the jobs that get them there. And so we build this for customers and get them to the point where literally everything is written as code. There's even the idea of how you govern things kind of changed, because everything is as code, and there's an artifact for everything, so you can always roll it back to whatever it was in the previous state. And you can also get a trail of all the changes over time, not just a year and a half, but the entirety of the life cycle of that application. So the next portion is that there was a lot of culture change and what had to take place within operations and in the relationship between kind of the business and IT, in order to cultivate a scenario where these things can be successful. One of the first ones is automation and innovation. So everyone is empowered to innovate, and through automation, we're trying to write everything as code. So that stuff leads to some changes for some of the human capital that's there, as they move from job roles where they may have been doing a particular role, say like a DBA, where they're moving from a set of tools that they use to do DBA work, but as a cloud engineer, they're using tools that are much more similar to the same tools that the development groups are using. There's a change in tool set there, and that kind of takes a cultural shift for those people to take on. Another big one here, and this is one of my favorite ones, is one business, this mindset that you have ownership of the product, the thing that you're working on. And that's for everyone, whether they be a developer actually writing the code, the operations people actually providing the infrastructure as code, or the product people that are involved in that process. Everyone gets to have a sense of ownership about it. it's kind of interesting watching the people's watching or listening to people's tone and how they describe the products, because instead of it being, for instance, instead of the developers talking about the servers as those guys servers, or the ops people talking about the development code as those guys code, it becomes our code and our servers, and together it becomes our product. And this is a big cultural change for a lot of organizations, but it's a powerful one that drives a lot of camaraderie in the ownership of what they're doing. The next part is value-driven disruption. So I note that it's value-driven disruption, and it's not just disruption for disruption's sake. But this is part of that that ownership, that empowerment, that you're empowering people to disrupt what the norm is and not make assumptions, but find new solutions that drive value for the business. So also own only what you must, and this is one we see in a lot of organizations as we work with many customers. We hear a lot of that tool's too expensive, or why would we do that tool, because we already know how to run those other tools that are similar to it. They already have an established capability around these things. This comes back to kind of that infrastructure and focusing on your core, though. Reality is infrastructure isn't the only portion of the IT function that's not core to the business at hand. So looking at this is kind of one of those mindsets that looking at that and making that change can be very powerful, because you'll get better quality tools out of it. Because what we do in IT a lot of times is we think that because it's an IT function that we'll spend the time as necessary to maintain and adjust those things as they grow, or even add new function to it. The reality is that's not core to what we're supposed to do, and we're often driven to do things that are not handle those core these type of infrastructure tools, and as a result, we don't really add new function to them. Whereas if you're purchasing that, and a lot of these SaaS tools, you get new functionality for free. You're already paying for it. It's built in. Last part here is transparency. So you want to build a culture of transparency where operations and the business and business to ops really has a fully transparent capabilities there. And this goes from everything from cost, so there's no hidden cost in what you're trying to do, and business being honest and transparent about revenues and where that value proposition really lies. So the next part of the cultures are more delivery focused, and so everything is a service. And we talked a little bit about this, but where do we get value from everything, and how we achieve the levels of automation that I think we want to is really trying to deliver everything as code. But there's also the everything as a service, even your added value IT functions as a service, and that's how you get into that consumerism. Is not putting yourself and not building out processes that require you to constantly build things. And so even as you're building out your own capabilities, you build them out with that as a service mindset. Continuous delivery is another big portion of this, and the DevOps mindsets that come with it. But this comes back to that one business type of mentality too. And continuous delivery is I'll talk a little bit about how cloud is a vehicle, but continuous delivery at a technical level is really kind of the automation and the vehicles that get us to really what DevOps is at a process standpoint. And then on demand, so only use what you need, um, and keep it at that. So you know, this is something that the AWS platform brings to you, and the ability to only use what you need, shut down anything that you're not using um, at that point in time. Cost efficiency, so the previous one of using on-demand stuff also drives to that cost efficiency. And something else that the platform, the AWS platform provides for is the ability to architect for cost, and keeping those costs relevant to that business driver, that revenue driver. So architecting for cost around AWS is something that everyone should do, and it's kind of new to IT to be able to thought that you could actually do that. It's stuff like understanding where something like Lambda could be used, and then architecting your application to use Lambda rather than simply relying on instances to provide your compute. Then empowerment. So we want to empower our customers to be able to consume IT without management-laden processes. But we also want to empower innovation within our teams to deliver a higher value. As some of these lower value things like network and the existence of CPU and RAM go away, allowing those people to find new ways to be of value to the business and innovate there becomes their next level in their career. So what all this did for us as we made that journey 5 years ago, 5 years into today, is that Amazon was really a driver. It's really a vehicle to achieving something far greater than just some technologies. It became a vehicle for getting us to a new way of performing IT and a new way of performing or providing value directly to a business unit. And when I talk about efficiency, and that's what this thing kind of drives to, that business efficiency, if you've seen the three-legged stool, it's always been said that you can only have two of these things, right? You can only have quality and speed and cost efficiency at the same time. If something was of high quality and was delivered really quickly, it would cost a lot. Or if something was really cheap, you were going to trade off quality or speed. And I think the AWS platform has allowed us to deliver really all three of these things at the same time through efficiencies that it provides. So the idea here is that we're taking IT beyond just aligning. It's more than just aligning to the business. It's really becoming or allowing an ownership of the business to own their destiny and own their IT equation. It's going beyond alignment to something new, a new way of working directly with business units. So I wanted to throw this out there for those of you who are starting to dip your toe for the first time or haven't seen this in the past. But AWS actually provides a cloud adoption model that will kind of gives you some high-level views of what you need to consider as you're making this maturing process and moving in this new direction that provides such business value. So I encourage you to get out there and take a look at the cloud adoption model. And one of the things we do at RELIS is add upon that with some real perspective that helps you actually deliver and get there. So I'm done with this portion of it. We can take some questions, I think. Mr. Baradine, do you have those?
Yes, so we had a couple questions come in via email, Kevin, and then also for anybody that has any questions now, feel free to type those into the chat box, and we will answer those accordingly. But Kevin, the first question that came in via email was, you had a slide where you mentioned Elastic Beanstalk, OpsWorks, and CloudFormation. Can you go back to that slide and give some overview of those AWS services and some benefits that they can lead to?
Sure. Back to that slide. This one. There are certainly others besides these, but I point these out because they're platform services. They're adding additional value past just the straight up infrastructure as a service. I did get that. Elastic Beanstalk actually, at its core, what the core value that Elastic Beanstalk brings to an organization is deployment management. Actually, it actually does stand up infrastructure, but that infrastructure is essentially a CloudFormation, which is some. To explain what CloudFormation is a JSON. It's a piece of code that lays out parameters for the entirety of the infrastructure that you're building. So think of it as the language that provides infrastructure as code in AWS. So rather than having to go like in a three-tier architecture, rather than having to go define what the load balancer is and then put that in place and then define the web servers and then define the database, I can actually write a piece of code that says this is what the load balancer is, this is where the web servers are, and this is what the database are, all in one, and I can run it all at one time, and it all emerges all at the same time. Now, Elastic Beanstalk does that same thing, but then it adds the added value that assuming that in the product lifecycle, you don't want to just emerge the infrastructure itself, but you actually want to be able to deploy code to the web servers. So Elastic Beanstalk helps you there by actually managing how you get that code from your lifecycle process into the actual instances so that they're serving for your customers. And then the OpsWorks application automation is kind of like, I guess we can throw it out there like it's Chef as a service, if you will. There's a little bit more to it than that, but I would almost have to demo it to really get full understanding of all that stuff. But it's very similar type concepts. It's going back to infrastructure as code, but more than the infrastructure, it's controlling the configuration that's on individual instances and what that means for the overall application. Does that answer that question? Hopefully. Should we move on to the next one?
Kevin. We have another one that came through. This one is, do you work with on-premise workloads? If yes, how much is in the public cloud and how much is on-premise? What do you keep in-house?
So we certainly work with scenarios where we're doing a little bit of both. And I guess the answer to that one is always really it depends. The reality is most anything can go to the cloud. Sometimes there's a question of whether or not it makes sense for it to or not. Workloads where the easy wins are workloads where you have the control to maybe re-engineer a little bit to, and a lot of times it's not major re-engineering, but a little bit of re-engineering to make the application more efficient in cloud use. And then some cases where we leave things on-prem is when we have a workload where maybe there's a third-party software involved that's maybe aging or something along those lines. and there's no way, either there's a licensing problem or there's a problem with really being able to change it in a way that would make efficient use of the cloud services. One thing to caution there is when you're doing things in a hybrid scenario there, you never want to create a scenario where a customer-facing workflow uses both at the same time, if you will. You want it to be separated. If you have pieces of workflow, you don't want to. It's what we call the difference between a hybrid app, which is where you've got both hybrid or both on-prem and cloud involved in the same workload, directly interfacing with the customer, versus a hybrid cloud scenario where a very fenced-off portion of the workflow is in the data center, while another very fenced-off portion of the workload, there's a very clear line, and it doesn't. There's no transition of the customer itself back and forth between where they're going. Other questions?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, we have a follow-up to that question. Okay. It was, in your experience with cloud adoption and migration to AWS, was there IT personnel reduction and decrease in headcount? Were people retrained or new types of people hired with different skills?
Combination of all of those things. So for the Scripps example that we started with, a small group really was carved out of a much larger IT organization. And then that as success was had out of that small group really didn't really grow that much. We maybe added 2 new specialties in the group around security and some cost and capacity management. But other than that, especially at the technical level, once we had kind of made that change, that core group certainly took on some new challenges, but once they evolved to what they were in the future, there was really no need for us to grow more for more people. And the reality for the larger IT organization, we're talking an organization that originally was over 100 people, and a cloud organization that was carved out of that was something just right at 20 people. And the reality for those other 80 headcounts, slowly over time, it doesn't happen overnight, but slowly over time, some attrition has occurred, and that's down to, I believe they're down around close to 50 total, including the 20 at this point. So there's certainly a headcount change there that can occur as long as these things are adopted appropriately and going forward. And there's certainly change. Like I said, there's certainly change for those people. And every person doesn't accept that change. An example of that is a DBA who says, I'm an Oracle DBA and I'm nothing more, and I'm never going to be anything more. For individuals like that, there's likely to come a time when you have to cut ties with that individual in order to fill in with a head that can provide that higher level value that we're looking for in cloud scenarios. Are there other questions?
Thanks, Kevin. One last question that came through. So what are the biggest hurdles that large organizations have when trying to adopt the cloud delivery model, and how has RELIS and or AWS supported these challenges?
So yeah, I'll speak to how RELIS has, but it's always people and processes. It's the change in process. The cultural change is always the hardest part. The biggest hurdle, honestly, the technology just isn't that hard. There's some challenges there, but most organizations have some really smart people in there. If you can just drive them at the right focus them in the right direction, then a lot of times you can get over those technology hurdles. It's almost always people. And where we see the most success is when leadership, and this is another big part of it, any organization absent of leadership will struggle, but especially when making these types of transformation. When leadership comes out and says, this is our new reality and this is where we're going, it removes the excuse point, and people start working together to try to get resolution to technical problems rather than writing technical problems off as an excuse for not making the transition. And we certainly help. We have a cloud strategy and intelligence services product. I'm personally working with 3 very large organizations currently through some of these very hurdles. And every organization is different, and sometimes it's making recommendations to leadership of how to focus that message out to their organization. And sometimes it's just helping work through the technology challenges because they've got it all right. They just don't have the focus. Sometimes there's been actually cases where very good people are involved, and they could do it. They just couldn't quite get over the hump, and we've provided some augmentation, if you will, at the front end of projects to help them get those initial wins, and then the organization is able to really start winning over kind of that to the theme of this webinar. That tidal wave kind of starts, and then that allows the organization to really get going. I know we had another one come in. Are we going to have time for that one? I don't know. If you guys will send in as many of them as you want, I will take all the time necessary to actually type out responses and personally respond back to those.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I know that we had a couple questions come in that were related to specific scenario in different organizations and how to engage with AWS and RELIS. A couple of those questions would be appropriate to have on a one-off conversation with you guys. So I will be reaching out individually to set up those conversations. But I know that we're coming up at the top of the hour and a lot of you have meetings to get to. So we're going to go ahead and conclude the webinar for today. We hope you guys found this session informative and enjoyable. We're really interested in your feedback and how we can improve our webinars. Please send all feedback to our marketing team at RELIS, RELUS-marketing@relis.com. And like I said, I'll be sending those follow-up emails to those of you who have requested time to speak with us individually. Thanks.